Okay, you guys, we've been talking about the different values and a lot of that terminology, and now we're going to see how this applies to our specific code of ethics. So here's our learning outcomes. When we talked about, I think, chapter 1, we talked about what makes a true profession, and one thing that we recognized that was having a code of ethics. And we talked about how, maybe a supermarket person doesn't necessarily have a code of ethics. So by having a code of ethics, this helps us be accountable to each other. If we had a hygiene friend, say, who was drilling teeth and doing fillings or something to that effect that was beyond the scope of practice, the code of ethics says, hey, we want to do no harm. We want to be have veracity, so honesty. And what that means is that another hygienist, if you saw that, it would be your responsibility to kind of report that, because we know that we're all abiding by these same concepts. That being said, one of the reasons that we cover this in hygiene school is because we want to kind of set you up for what is expected of our profession. What are, the ethical values that we hold when you become into the profession? So when we look at people who are even accepted in the program, we want somebody that already we can kind of see that they have values and good character. Everything kind of goes back to this Hippocratic oath, and we've kind of touched along about this before. I don't think we really need to go into it, but if you look at kind of some key words, it talks about, I'll apply dietetic measures for the benefit of the sick. I will not give a deadly drug. So it follows kind of some of those terms that we talked about of beneficence and non-maleficence and things like that. And if you can read through this in detail and look at kind of what that involved. One thing about an ethical code is it really doesn't solve everything, right? We can't come up with every single thing that you might be faced with. We can't say, and insurance fraud, we don't want you to do that. And, don't give injections even though you've given them in other states, because that would be practicing without what's legal or whatever. So you can't address everything, but we can give those core values and give you something to say, now, how does this fit in? And we could use our prima facie duties, where we say, well, we have autonomy here and beneficence, which is the stronger one here. So it does give us something to rely on, and gives us something to consider when we're faced an ethical dilemma. So the first one was established in 1927. So it was revised most recently in 1995. I have a lot of experience with this, and honestly, it's not my favorite part, but as the president-elect and the president, I am automatically of TDHA. I'm automatically part of the House of Delegates for ADHA. And so around the annual conference time, and actually Katie did this as well, I think we need to have Katie explain this a little bit in class, but they will discuss our code of ethics and our bylaws, and if somebody wants to make a change to it, and sometimes it's just a minute word. Sometimes it's like, well, this is saying we don't want to give off the wrong impression, or they'll come up with a substitution and they'll really debate what's the best way to say this so we're, coming off the right way, because we know that people rely on this and things. And so even at the Texas Dental Hygienists Association, we do the same thing there. And so if you guys ever go to an annual session, or you guys can choose to be a delegate from your local component. So if you're part of Dallas, you can say, hey, can I be a delegate for you? And you come down. Like I said, a lot of the components will pay for you to attend the conference and your hotel expenses. Not all of them, but a lot do. And so that's kind of a good way for you to get involved and kind of see how this works on a bigger way. Last year at the virtual House of Delegate that they kind of did a sample of this and this year one of the things that came up was they talked about changing our bylaws so it supports the non-patient exam. Meaning, saying, oh, we would like somebody to be able to have we want to show that we support the mannequin exam, basically. And there was a lot of discussion about, well, if we say this, are we saying we don't want them to have an exam at all? Are we, and so there was a lot of discussion about how to actually word that so that we can show that we support the non-live patient exam, but we still want them to have an exam. So, and then if that ever comes up, say in a legislative session, we have a document to go back to say, this is what we feel like we support, this is what the association supports. So it's kind of interesting, and it does start to be tomato to me. That's why it seems a little tedious, and some things get so hung up over, should we use this word or this word? And some people love it. I have a couple people that say, this is so fun. But it's definitely interesting to see the process and to recognize that there's a really defined process to make a change in TDA or ADHA's bylaws. So, and you can always, when you start to get involved I think you have to be a TDHA delegate for a couple years, and then you can actually try to be an ADHA delegate. And when you're an ADHA delegate, similarly, they pay for you to go to the annual session and things like that. There's a lot of meetings beforehand where you discuss what bylaws are coming up, and we try to determine ahead of time, how do we want to vote on this? Do we have a recommended way for them to change it? So anyways, it's an interesting process. If you look at the Code of Ethics, talks about, these are kind of the different sections of it, and we'll talk about this in the next slide. So we'll kind of move on. But it kind of is broken up into sections. And it says the dental hygienist should be ready to respond to the want of her patrons, should be recognized the obligations involved in the discharge to the duties. Also, section 2 talks about patients don't know everything, and so we need to kind of expect that we might have to explain things to them, things like that. And then section 3 is dental hygienists should be temperate in all things. And when you look down at the bottom here, it talks about, we have an obligation to ourselves too, to keep ourselves healthy, to support our profession, just different things like that. Okay, as far as the ADA dental code, they kind of have 3 different sections. There are principles of ethics, the code of professional conduct, and advisory opinions. So each section of the code of the professional conduct is followed by an advisory opinion. And so even though we aren't necessarily monitored by it, we'll always be working with dentists that are going to be trying to follow the ADA code of ethics. And so it's good to be familiar with it. We've already seen this slide before. They have very similar codes of ethics as far as their values, but the 2 things that we have that they don't have is confidentiality, kind of respecting the patient's confidentiality, and the societal trust. So one thing that's really important to us as hygienists is that the population trusts us. Let's see, should I break this into 2? I think I'm going to stop here, and then I'll come back in slide 2 and we'll go over this section. So stay tuned for slide 2.